Assalamualaikum Warahmatullahi Wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are from Group 2, and in this special occasion, we would like to present our presentation of paper that talks about civil and political rights. So, this is our group members, which consists of Walu Jeffrey Alim Wahtum, Habib Hatami Panjaitan, and also me, Atika Rana Fergus Putri. So here is our table of contents. The first one is introduction, wherein here we are going to discuss about the historical background and also the development of civil and political rights, and then what is civil and political rights. And the second one is discussion, where we are going to divide into two subchapters. The first one is how are civil and political rights implemented in the state, and also the second one is the case study of Myanmar Coup, Myanmar government human rights violence on civil and political rights. And the third one, or the last part, we are going to conclude all of our discussion in the conclusion section. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I want to ask, did you know what is human rights? So, human rights is the right that given to every humans who are instinctively expect deserve to be treated as a person, like the right to live freely, to speak your opinion, to be treated the same, the right to live where we are all born free, equal, and have a freedom of religion. According to one of the experts or scholars named John Locke, he said that human rights are the rights owned by humans which are given directly from God as a natural rights and have fundamental characteristic. For that reason, there isn't any power in this world that can uproot it from individual. So this right is given all humans and is inherent in humans. So it can be said that this right is universal or applies for every individual because everyone in this world were born with this right and entitled to them. And all people on the same right, regardless any differences like their race, gender, ethnic, religion, and etc. Also, this right cannot be and never be taken away or given away. However, as a human being, despite we are entitled to our human rights, we also should respect and stand up for human rights for others. In 1948, the United Nations Human Rights Commission had captured the world attention, where back then Eleanor Roosevelt chaired the formulation process of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights draft. The UDHR was adopted on 10 December 1948 by the 56 member nations of the UN General Assembly, and it was happened in the General Assembly meeting in Paris. And the result of this UDHR is the experience of the World War II. Thus, it can be said that the emergence of the concept of human rights internationally in the West is a form of effort to address threats of human dignity that are generated by oppressive economic and political systems. Okay. So, in here, I'm going to talk about the historical background and also the development of civil and political rights. So, yeah, after the acceptance of Universal Declaration in 1948, there was a need for the change of human rights, which become a legally binding obligation. In order to adopt such a binding agreement, which is carried out to protect the human rights, one agreement is deemed insufficient to cover problems that have a different characteristic. Therefore, the UN General Assembly asked to the UN Human Rights Commission in a session that took place in 1951 to build a draft of a convention that discussing or talk about the civil and political rights, which will contain various articles stipulating that all people have the right to determine their own destiny. So that the division can be seen in 1966, where there was acceptance of two separate covenants, namely the first one is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which we are going to talk here in this presentation. And the second one is the International Covenant on Economic and Social Cultural Rights. And these two covenants came into the force after 35 countries ratified the two treaties in 1976. However, the delay that occurred about this ratifying is mostly caused by the Cold War, where human rights were abused and politicized. In addition, the UN General Assembly also ratified the optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which was the same as passed on December 16, 1966. So, what is the purpose of the ratifying this covenant, this ICCPR covenant? So, the aim of ratifying the ICCPR covenant was to strengthen the principle of human rights in the civil and political fields, as stated in the UDHR is therefore a provision that will be legally binding and, in its translation, will cover other related issues. Okay. Before we are going to discuss any further about civil and political rights, I want to provide some insight into the classification of rights, which are divided into two, namely positive and negative rights, which are differentiated based on the government action towards the involvement of the certain problems. Initially, civil and political rights were said to be negative rights, which mean they get freedom from government interference in various fields. However, though such a concept is not entirely correct, because in some field, the civil and political rights is also need or requires action from the state, such as like the rights to participate in free election. And then these two rights are also referred as first generation rights, because the history origins of this right are from the philosophical and political liberal tradition that promote the theme of individualism. In understanding the human rights, the first generation understand it in a negative term, namely the freedom from, rather than the positive term. So the core concept put forward by the first generation is the concept of freedom, protection of individuals, and also in association with other peoples, as well as a form of avoiding abuse of political authority. Thus, it can be said that the dimension in civil and political rights can be considered as a hands-off or negative rights, where the state, organization, or any other kind of groups of people are involved in it. The next part is, what is civil and political rights? So civil and political rights can be said to be an old right, because the ideas are mentioning something that has been discussed in Magna Carta, and it is also the first right that acknowledged as a part of human rights. However, what is the civil rights? So the civil right deal with the standard of judiciary and penal system. It can be said that civil rights are the rights that talks about your identity and focus on the existence of legal protection for individuals and groups, from all forms of oppression that are widely accepted throughout the world. Regardless our ethnicity, our religion, or any backgrounds, it doesn't mean that you can get this right. In order to achieve this right, the state or organization have an obligation to keep their hands off and allow you to express this right. Thus, this right is related to the participation of people in the society, where all of that fully recognized by all institutions in that country, so as not to be discriminated because your identity is the important discussion. And also civil right related to the right that belongs to any individual to make an original thought as expression, or something that related maybe like to a religion, or something like a freedom of movement. So the form of civil right, there are several forms of civil right, including like the right to receive protection from all forms of discrimination against race, sex, gender, ethnicity, religion, and then the right to live and public safety, the right to express and speak as an individual, and also the right to assemble of and move. So the next one is, what is political rights? So first of all, rights are something that every human must have. Meanwhile, according to Andrew Haywood, he said that politics is an activity carried out by a state or nation with the aim of maintaining, creating, amending the general regulation governing to the country. From this two meaning, we can correlate it that the political right is a right that is owned by humans to be able to take a part in the governmental activity of a country, meaning that every individual has his or her own right to freedom in political activities, such as the right to be elected and to vote, which also includes in general elections, and the right to run as a leaders, and etc. This right deal with the specific components of participant in political powers. Political rights are a form of rights which give a freedom to every individual to participate in the scope of political activities or exercise about your political sort of rights in the state directly or indirectly. This right shows that every individual has the same opportunity to participate in political activities in their country. In political, we might be talk about the right of petition or the right to justice, and even more talk about the practical things like being able to go to court and be seen fairly and equally without any discrimination. So political rights, exercising your rights as a citizen in a political way, where it is reversed of the popular sovereignty by individuals whenever they take parts in the conduction of public affairs, whether by electing representative or by running a public officer. The several forms of political rights, such as the right to be elected and to vote, the right to get a fair and periodic elections, the right include natural protections such as the right to a fair trial. So, ladies and gentlemen, both of these rights, the civil and political rights, both protect the existence of individuals' freedom from all forms of violation by other parties, such as the private individuals, the group or social organization, and the government too, that ensure the ability and opportunity of a person to be able to participate in the political and social life of a society and the state without discrimination or oppressions. Also, the political and civil sort of tone to the entire dimension has a lot to do with the citizenship, where they are generally enshrined as a part of your citizenship to a country.
So next, I will explain about how civil and political rights are implemented in the state. So in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, almost every country has ratified this right. This covenant is very important for every country to have. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights contains important of guarantees for the protection of civil and political rights. This covenant was adopted by UN General Assembly on 16 December 1966. One of the countries has ratified this. This right is Switzerland, which adopted the covenant on 18 June 1992. The ICCPR has two optional protocols. The first optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights individuals under the jurisdiction of state parties who claim that their rights and freedoms under the covenant have been violated can submit written communication to the Human Rights Committee. The United Nations complemented the optional protocol on 16 December 1966. It entered into force on 23 March 1976. Second optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civic and Political Rights aimed at the abolition of the death penalty. The protocol obliges states parties to abolish the death penalty. The United Nations completed the protocol on 15 December 1989 and entered into force on 11 July 1991. So there are different ways of implementing the right in country. This right has two treaties. So Pact 1, concern rights, which in principle contain the obligation of society to act towards individuals such as the right to work, to strike, to social security, right to family protection, the right to an adequate standard of living, health as much as possible, or the right to education. Pact 2 contains what are called classical civil liberties, which protect individuals from restriction imposed by the state. What will be mentioned is the right to live, the right prohibition of torture, slavery, and forced labor, the right to freedom, the obligation to treat detainees humanly and respectfully, guarantees of equality for all people in court, freedom of expression, the right to protection of private life, both the right of minorities, the right of society to self-determination, the general prohibition of discrimination or the prohibition of discrimination against women is contained in these two treaties. So this Switzerland only has ratified Pact 2. So both Pact provide mandatory reporting experience for international control over domestic law enforcement measures. So every 4 years, contract countries must submit a report in which they account for the step taken to realize their respective rights and for the progress made, and also to indicate the difficulties that may arise in implementing the pact. So Switzerland submit its first report in February 1995. The Human Rights Committee concluded its first report on 8 November 1996. The second report on Pact 2 was submitted in September 1998. So the update from the second report has been submitted. The committee adopted its conclusion in its second report on 5 November 2001. So on 12 October 2007, Switzerland submitted its third country report on Pact 2 to the Human Rights Committee. So after the oral presentation of the report on 12 and 13 October 2009, the Human Rights Committee published its conclusion on 30 October 2009. So any international instrument approved by Switzerland becomes directly a part of Swiss law and binds all bodies of the state in accordance with the monist doctrine. Therefore, international commitments are implemented immediately without any special procedure necessary or for international norms to be enforced under Swiss law. With the implementation of the ICCPR, Switzerland guarantees that every citizen of his country has the protection of physical integrity, the right to live, the prohibition of torture, the prohibition of genocide, the prohibition of discrimination on the basis of race, color, sex, language, religion, political position, fortune, origin, etc. So that's all from me. Next study case will explain with my friends Habib. Thank you.
Okay, I will continue the presentation about the case study. So we took Myanmar Coup as our case study with the headlines of Myanmar government, human rights violence on political rights. First, I will tell you what happened in Myanmar. So in recent time, Myanmar experienced coup in its government by the military led by the Min Aung Hlaing against the elected president of Myanmar, Win Myint. This coup began with the kidnapping of pro-democracy activists and also the kidnapping of state advisor Aung San Suu Kyi. Because of this incident, the people of Myanmar do or staged the demonstration to respond the coup action carried out by the military. The military that led by the Min Aung Hlaing respond with the threats to the demonstrant community by taking effective action that against those who took part in the demonstration and not returning to work as usually. Okay, in the next slide, this is how the government respond to the demonstrants. So in here we can see from the picture that police cars shoot the water cannons to the demonstrants, and the police, they arrest the people that do the protest or do the demonstration, and you can see that the security or the police use the guns to respond the demonstration action that carried out by the community. Currently, the military is hunting down 100 celebrities who support the demonstration or the anti-coup the demonstration. Because of this situation, the situation in Myanmar, in the country, is become worse, and many victims were fell. There more than 100 people died, and there are more than 2,000 people that arrested for opposing the coup. Now I'm telling you the human rights violation on Myanmar coup. So the violation that occurred were more about the violation of civil rights and political rights that committed by the military. So I will mention the 3 points of violation on Myanmar coup that committed by the military. The first thing is the military is arrest of demonstrators and activists who voice their opinions. We can see from the previous slide they arrest the people who do the demonstration. And the second is the military is carrying out the violence and shooting against demonstration who against the coups. Yeah, we can see from the previous slide too that the police is used the gun, that use the rubbers and the leaf bullets and shooting it to the demonstrant. And the third is the military, the police, they ban all activities or action to protest and exercise the right of freedom of expression in any media, in the news, radio, and also in social media. So, based on the information and action taken by the Myanmar military during the coup, is what they do is violation to human rights based on Article 3, Article 5, Article 10, and Article 9. You can see in Article 3 they violate because they arrest people, arrest the demonstrants, and hunting down the person that who against the coup. And in Article 5 the Myanmar military use the guns to the people do the demonstration and shooting water cannons to the demonstrant. In Article 10 and Article 19, the Myanmar military during coup, they banned all of the media access for the demonstrants and what happens to the demonstrants. That's violation to the Article 10 and Article 19. The freedom of speaking and give opinion without interference to seek there and receive or impart information, ideas, through any media and regardless of frontier. And As far as we know, this the violation that do by the Myanmar military during the coup that was carried out in Myanmar. So I think that's all about the human rights violation. Thank you.
We move to the very last part of this presentation, which is conclusion. In conclusion, we can say that in the UDHR, there are several rights that are classified as human rights, and two of them is civil and political rights, which are the first right to be recognized. Basically, this right arises due to the desire for individual freedom of protections or freedom from all of forms of violation or abuse of power. And the Second World War that gave rise to a modern view of human rights made the individual rights as the center where legally protected individual rights, and this is the result of the adoption of the UDHR. So, civil and political rights are strengthened by the emergence of a convention called as the ICCPR, which is important and can be guaranteed for every country. And then by looking at the study case or the conflict situation in Myanmar, we can say that Myanmar is violating the human rights, and the two of them included the civil and political rights. In Myanmar, there has been a political crisis that violates the democratic rights of Myanmar citizens, which of course violates the civil and political rights of individuals in Myanmar. And the treatment by the police or the action by the police and military in Myanmar that denied the pro-democracy masses are not in line with the values of that contained in the ICCPR, where the community who voiced their opinion or criticized them were immediately arrested, and moreover, in the worst case, there were also many victims who died because they were killed. And in handling this case, the response from the United Nations as the international organization and also any other country is very important in order to reinforce the human rights values in Myanmar. And in this capacity, United Nations can address this violation by take a role intervening constructively. However, all these things must be carried out firmly by the United Nations, especially by the Security Council at the United Nations. So I think that's all presentation from us. I hope all of you can understand well. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.